clink of crystal, the hush of moneyed laughter. It was one of those nights where fame floated like perfume. Inside Aurum, the city's most exclusive restaurant, power didn't just dine, it performed. Cameras flickered like hungry insects as celebrities posed in velvet corners, champagne flutes sweating gold. And in the middle of it all, he stood. Marcus Reed, tray in hand, expression composed, eyes quiet. To them, he was a shadow, another black waiter blending into the rhythm of service. But inside, a storm brewed, a storm 15 years in the making. He'd walked into this restaurant that night for one reason: to remember where he started, to remember the taste of humility, before he changed the flavor of his fate forever. But fate had its own sense of humor. When he stepped toward table 7, the table everyone was watching, she was there. Vivian Crane, the golden actress with an empire built on roles of virtue she didn't live by. Every inch of her sparkled. Diamonds at her ears, fame in her smile, cruelty behind her glass of champagne. She noticed him immediately. "Could you top this off?" she asked, lifting her flute without looking. Her tone was casual, but her smirk wasn't. He poured carefully, smooth, controlled, until her friend bumped the table and a single drop of champagne kissed her designer gown. Her gasp came first, then the laughter. "Are you kidding me?" she said, rising to her feet. "You people can't even serve a drink without." She stopped, but it was too late. The words had already scorched the air. Every head turned, phones tilted upward, recording. The audience she'd always craved was right here, and she was performing humiliation in high definition. Marcus stood still. His pulse didn't race. His breathing didn't break. Because he'd learned long ago, silence cuts louder than shouting. He dabbed the edge of her gown with a folded cloth. His voice, when it came, was low, deliberate. "My apologies, ma'am." "Oh, please," Vivian sneered. "Just bring me another bottle. And make sure you don't drop that one." Her friends laughed. One mimed spilling. Another muttered something about minimum wage nerves. Marcus nodded once, then turned, slow, calm, the way you turn when you're holding something explosive inside and waiting for the right second to light the fuse. He walked back toward the bar. Behind him, the laughter rippled again. But there was something different about his steps now. A rhythm, almost like the quiet countdown of destiny. At the bar, the manager caught his arm. "Hey, Marcus, you okay?" "I can handle that table." Marcus smiled faintly. "No need. I'm good." He looked around. The chandeliers, the marble, the quiet orchestra. He'd designed this place to be untouchable, a palace of exclusivity. He'd once dreamed of walking through its doors as a guest. Instead, he built the fortune that bought it. Only no one in this room knew it yet. He pulled his phone from his pocket, thumb hovering over a message thread labeled "Legal Team, Aurum Acquisition." He typed one word, "Proceed," and hit send. Across the city, in a high-rise suite, a liar looked up from his desk. The deal that had been brewing for weeks, a quiet, strategic purchase of Aurum and its attached properties, was suddenly greenlit. Within an hour, the restaurant's ownership would shift hands. The same hour Vivian Crane spent laughing. When Marcus returned to the table, her group was still mid-story. She didn't even notice him approach. He placed a new bottle of champagne beside her plate. Her eyes flicked up, smug. "Decided not to spill this time?" He smiled. "No, ma'am. Not this time." Then, calmly, he reached for the folded slip of paper in his vest pocket. The official transfer of ownership, time-stamped and sealed. He placed it on the table next to her glass. "This," he said softly, "is the bill for tonight." Vivian frowned. "What's this supposed to?" He leaned closer, voice a whisper sharp enough to cut diamonds. "Actually, it's the deed. You're sitting in my restaurant." Her friends froze. The laughter died. She blinked, Once, twice. You're joking. Marcus straightened. Not tonight. And just like that, the silence turned heavy. He didn't gloat, didn't smile. Just looked at her with the calm of a man who'd already won the war without ever lifting his voice. I came here tonight to remember where I started, he said quietly. Thank you for reminding me why I built what I did. Then he walked away. Behind him, her reflection in the mirror looked small, stripped of its glow, its audience, its borrowed importance. That night, the papers signed. The ownership finalized. And by sunrise, every headline in the city told the same story. Hollywood star humiliates waiter. Turns out, he's the new owner of the restaurant. And as Marcus stood on the balcony of his penthouse, watching dawn spill across the skyline, he whispered to himself, power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just signs the check. Stay with me, because what happens next isn't revenge. It's revelation. And if you think this was the victory, wait until you see how he uses it. Morning light hit the headlines before it touched her face. Vivian Crane woke to the buzz of her phone, the vibration trembling across the marble nightstand like a warning. She blinked, disoriented, her head heavy with the taste of champagne and the echo of laughter she barely remembered. Then the screen lit up, dozens of notifications, hundreds, all bearing the same image. Her face frozen mid-sneer, a wine-stained gown, and the caption that would haunt her for years. Actress mocks black waiter, who turns out to be billionaire owner. She stared at the headline, blinking as if she could rewrite it with sheer disbelief. The photo had gone viral overnight. There were clips, slow-motion edits, commentaries dissecting every frame. The internet didn't just eat scandals. It feasted on hypocrisy, and Vivian was the main course. Every channel ran the story. Every blogger repeated the same phrase. The man she laughed at owns everything she touched. She scrolled frantically, her heart racing, until she reached his name. Marcus Reed. She'd heard it before. Everyone had. The man who'd built Reed Capital from nothing. The billionaire with a reputation for elegance, philanthropy, and mystery. The man who refused interviews. And last night, she had thrown wine, not at a waiter, but at him. She sank onto the bed, the air in her penthouse suddenly too heavy to breathe. Meanwhile, Marcus watched the same story play out on a muted screen in his downtown suite. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, investors, friends. He ignored them all. The world saw a scandal. He saw a mirror. He hadn't planned the public humiliation. He planned closure. But the universe had written a script he hadn't expected. Sir, his assistant said from the doorway, the press wants a statement. Should we confirm ownership? Marcus didn't look away from the skyline. No statements, he said quietly. Truth doesn't need a press release. He turned off the television and let the silence settle. There was satisfaction, yes, but also something deeper. The laughter from last night replayed in his mind, not as mockery now, but as music that had lost its tune. For a man who built empires from invisibility, the irony was almost poetic. By noon, every major outlet had found the footage. Hashtags surged. Hashtag waiter boss. Hashtag respect in reverse. Hashtag Marcus Reed. Opinion pieces flooded in, some praising him for his calm dignity, others condemning Vivian for the arrogance of her kind. The restaurant itself became a pilgrimage site. Reporters stood outside Orm's gilded doors, interviewing staff who'd worked under him without knowing his true identity. One hostess told the cameras, he was always kind, always watching, but I never guessed he owned the place. Inside his office, Marcus sat with a stack of files he wasn't reading. What he really saw were ghosts. The years he spent as a busboy, mopping floors while customers waved him away like a shadow. Orm had been the place that broke him once. Now it was the one he rebuilt himself through. Power, he thought, wasn't revenge. It was balance restored. A Across town, Vivian tried to contain the fire. Her publicist paced her living room, muttering crisis lines that sounded like apologies dressed in PR perfume. "We can say it was a misunderstanding," the woman offered. "You were tipsy, emotional." "No," Vivian cut in, voice sharp, desperate. "He set me up. He had to. No one's that calm unless they knew it was coming." "Vivian," the publicist said carefully, "the video shows everything. He didn't provoke you." He barely spoke. Vivian turned away, a reflection in the glass showing a version of herself she didn't recognize. Eyes swollen, lips trembling, the gleam of power stripped raw. For the first time in years, no camera wanted her smile. She opened her laptop, typed his name again, Marcus Reed. His face filled the screen. Dark skin, quiet eyes, the kind of expression that made arrogance look small. Every article painted him as the hero of restraint, the billionaire who taught the world a lesson without saying a word. She slammed the lid shut, frustration burning through humiliation. "He's not a saint," she muttered. "He can't be." But somewhere beneath the anger, something else stirred guilt, the slow kind that didn't shout, just whispered when the noise faded. That night, Marcus returned to Aurum. The staff greeted him with reverence now, voices low, unsure how to treat the man who'd once served beside them. He waved it off gently. "Same rules," he said. "Respect doesn't need titles." He walked through the dining hall, each table still glowing with the memory of laughter, the air still heavy with judgment. Then he stopped at table 7, the scene of last night's undoing. The white cloth was new, spotless. He pulled out a chair and sat alone. For a moment, he could still hear her laugh echoing faintly, and he let it wash over him, not with bitterness, but clarity. "Funny thing about life," he murmured, almost to himself. "It doesn't forget. It just waits." His phone buzzed again. A message from a journalist he respected. "Marcus, everyone's talking. What do you want them to learn from this?" He tapped back. "That power isn't about what you own. It's about how you behave when someone thinks you have none." He hit send and leaned back, closing his eyes. Outside, the paparazzi flashed like restless stars, but inside, Marcus felt peace for the first time in years. Still, deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the story, only the beginning of a reckoning neither of them saw coming. Because what happens when humiliation turns viral isn't justice, it's exposure. And exposure, in the right light, changes everyone. Stay with me, because what comes next will test what redemption really costs. By the third day, the story had become a storm that no PR team could contain. The video wasn't just viral anymore, it was immortal. Every edit, every slow zoom, every remix of her laughter set to haunting piano music turned Vivian Crane from a darling of Hollywood into a global cautionary tale. The internet crowned Marcus Reed a symbol of quiet power, the billionaire who never needed to shout to win. Brands dropped Vivian within hours. Her perfume line paused production. Her upcoming film quietly postponed for creative reasons. Even her friends stopped answering calls. She wasn't canceled, not yet, but she was bleeding slowly in the court of public opinion. The same cameras that once worshipped her now hunted her, hoping to capture tears. And she gave them none. Not because she didn't feel the pain, but because she didn't know how to anymore. The fame had trained her to wear smiles like masks, and now, stripped of them, she barely recognized the person underneath. Across the city, Marcus sat in his office, watching stock tickers rise. Reed Capital had gained 10 million overnight investors, loved integrity, and his name had become synonymous with it. His team wanted him to do interviews, write books, milk the moment. "We could turn this into a movement," his VP told him. "A story about resilience, representation, and respect. It's what the world needs." Marcus shook his head. The world doesn't need more speeches. It needs silence to think. But silence, he knew, was rarely allowed to last. His assistant entered with hesitation. "There's someone waiting downstairs. She says she won't leave until she sees you." Marcus didn't have to ask who. For a second, he considered saying no. But curiosity, the dangerous kind, won. He stood. "Send her up." The elevator ride for Vivian Crane felt longer than any red carpet she'd ever walked. She wore no makeup, her hair tied back, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. When the doors opened, Marcus was already standing by the window, back to her, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond. She hesitated, then spoke. "I needed to see you. I figured," he said without turning. "You've had quite the week." She let out a shaky laugh. "That's one way to put it. I came to apologize. Not for the cameras, not for the headlines, just for me. For what I said." Marcus turned slowly, eyes calm but unreadable. "Do you remember what you said?" The question hung like smoke. She looked down. "Yes, good," he replied. "Because words are like glass they don't unbreak." She flinched but didn't leave. "I deserve everything that's happening," she whispered. "But I also know the world loves to destroy. Today it's me. Tomorrow, someone else. And I don't think I can survive it again." Marcus studied her face. There was no glamour left, no stage light hiding the cracks. Just a woman learning that fame feeds until it eats its own. "Survival," he said quietly, "isn't about being liked. It's about being honest." She looked up. "And what about forgiveness?" He paused, then gestured toward the city below. "Forgiveness is expensive. Most people can't afford it." Silence filled the room. It wasn't cold, it was cleansing. For a moment, they weren't billionaire and actress, offender and offended. Just two people caught in the machinery of perception. "You didn't deserve what I said," she murmured. "And you didn't deserve to be turned into a headline either." "I don't want to be defined by cruelty." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then stop feeding the image. Let it starve." She frowned, unsure if it was advice or warning. "Do you ever regret being quiet?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But I never regret being dignified." Her eyes glistened, not with the performative tears of interviews, but with something raw. She reached into her bag and pulled out a check. "This is a donation," she said. "For whatever 'cause you think deserves it. It's not to buy forgiveness. It's to balance something I broke." Marcus didn't take it. "If you want to balance it, start where it began, with the people who can't afford mistakes." She nodded, realizing he meant more than money. "Will you ever tell your side?" she asked finally. Marcus smiled faintly. "I already did. I just didn't need words." She exhaled slowly, then turned toward the elevator. Before the doors closed, she looked back. "Thank you for letting me speak. Everyone deserves to be heard," he said, "even when they're wrong." When she left, Marcus returned to the window. Below, the city pulsed with movement, as if unaware of the lessons being written in quiet rooms. He wasn't angry anymore. The story had evolved beyond insult. It had become parable. His phone buzzed again. A message from his mentor, an old restaurateur who'd once taught him how to serve without shame. "You handled that with grace," it read. "But remember, forgiveness doesn't mean friendship." Marcus typed back, understood. Still, part of him wondered if maybe grace was the final form of power. Later that evening, Vivian released a statement online. No makeup, no PR polish, just her voice breaking in honesty. "What I did was cruel. What he did was kind. And that difference will follow me longer than any scandal." Within hours, the internet began to shift. Not to forget, but to understand. Comments filled with reflection instead of rage. Marcus didn't repost, didn't comment. He simply watched, the faintest smile crossing his face. The storm was passing, but its echo would remain. For the first time, both of them understood that dignity is the only revenge that never ages. And yet, the world's attention has a short memory, and the price of peace is never final. Stay with me, because when redemption begins to bloom, temptation always returns to test its roots. The week after the storm felt unnaturally calm. The world had moved on to a new scandal, a new headline. But inside Marcus Reed's chest, there was still that quiet hum, a sound between victory and unease. He sat in his corner office at Reed Capital, the skyline bleeding orange behind him, reviewing a proposal that smelled of power. It was from Halberd Holdings, a multinational real estate conglomerate that had once refused to partner with him years ago because, as one board member whispered at the time, his background doesn't fit our image. Now the same executives were begging for his signature on a billion-dollar urban redevelopment deal. The irony was delicious, but Marcus wasn't smiling. The plan promised jobs, profit, and prestige, but at a cost. Buried deep in the contract was a clause that would quietly evict hundreds of small business owners from the district where Marcus grew up. It was the neighborhood that taught him hunger, the place where his mother's diner once stood before the bank took it away. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. "Sir," said Elena, his chief of staff, stepping into the room, "the board wants an answer by Friday. Halberd's CEO is flying in personally." Marcus nodded but didn't reply. His eyes drifted to a framed photo on the shelf, his mother smiling in that diner apron. Grease on her cheek, the sign Reed's Kitchen glowing in the background. He'd promised her he'd rebuild it someday. He just never thought he'd have to choose between doing that and doing right. That night, Marcus drove through the old neighborhood. Streetlights flickered, stores closed early, and yet the air carried a heartbeat, the rhythm of people surviving. He parked outside a narrow cafe run by Mrs. Jang, a woman who'd known him since he was 10. When she saw him step out of the car, her eyes lit up. "Well, if it isn't the man who made the news," she said with a laugh, pouring him coffee that tasted like memory. "We're proud of you, baby. You showed them you don't have to scream to win." Marcus smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Yang, trying to make sure I keep winning the right way." She leaned forward. "The right way's the hard way, but it lets you sleep at night." Her words followed him all the way home. By morning, Halberd's private jet had landed. The CEO himself, Charles Vance, arrived at Reed Capital with a practiced grin and a cigar that reeked of entitlement. "Marcus," he boomed, "the man of the hour. Loved what you did with that restaurant story. Perfect PR for your brand respect and resilience." America eats that up. Marcus extended his hand but didn't smile. "It wasn't PR." Vance waved him off. Of course. Still, it made you a household name. Which is why this partnership makes sense. We clean up the old district. You get credit for revitalizing your roots, and we all get rich. Marcus studied him quietly. "And the people who live there now?" Vance shrugged. "Collateral progress. We'll relocate them. Better housing, technically. Not your problem once the ink's dry." Marcus's jaw tightened. He looked down at the glossy renderings spread across the table towers of glass where Seoul once lived. He could already hear the echo of bulldozers. Vance lit his cigar and leaned back. "Come on, Marcus. You're not still sentimental about that place. You're a businessman now." Marcus met his gaze, steady. "Being a businessman doesn't mean forgetting where you started." Vance smirked. "Then maybe you shouldn't have left." The words hit harder than Marcus expected. For a moment, the memory of his mother's voice cut through the haze. "Never let success make you small again, baby." He stood. "Meeting's over." Vance blinked. "Excuse me. You heard me. I don't build wealth by erasing people who remind me of where I came from." Vance's smile collapsed. "You'll regret this, Reed. Deals like this don't come twice." Marcus walked into the elevator. calm but unshaken. Good. I only need the ones that let me look in the mirror. As the doors closed on Vance's glare, Marcus felt something stir, an old fire, not of revenge, but of principle. He turned back toward his office, unaware that saying no to Vance would open another door, entirely one connected to Vivian Crane in ways he didn't yet see. 2 days after Marcus turned down Halbert Holdings, the calls began. Reporters asking if he was walking away from a billion-dollar future. Investors wondering if he'd lost his edge. Anonymous emails whispering that maybe the Golden CEO wasn't so invincible after all. Markets move on rumor, and rumor moves like smoke, slow at first, then everywhere. Reed Capital's stock dipped 2 points in a single afternoon. Marcus didn't panic, but he could feel the temperature shift around him, the quiet tremor of board members starting to question his judgment. He'd been here before, surrounded by doubt, learning how calm could be a weapon. Still, that night, as the lights of the city blurred past his car window, he caught himself wondering if integrity was a luxury even billionaires couldn't always afford. At home, the silence felt heavier than usual. The balcony doors were open, wind rustling through the curtains, carrying faint sirens from downtown. He poured himself a drink, no ice, and stared at the skyline. "You did the right thing," he whispered, though it sounded more like a question than an affirmation. His phone buzzed once unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the message. "I think we need to talk. Vivian." He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. She hadn't reached out since that day in his office, when guilt had cracked her mask. Curiosity won again. "Where?" he replied. Her answer came seconds later. "Orem, after closing." At midnight, the restaurant was empty, the same marble glow that once witnessed humiliation now reflecting something quieter, maybe redemption. Vivian sat at table 7, the place that had tied their names together forever. She wore no disguise, no camera makeup, only a dark coat and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept much. "Thank you for coming," she said when he approached. "You picked the right table," he replied. She smiled faintly. Maybe the wrong life. Marcus sat across from her, folding his hands. "What do you need, Vivian?" "I heard about Halbert," she said. "Everyone has. You said no to them." "Wasn't the right deal. It was the biggest deal," she countered. "And now they're trying to ruin you for it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "How do you know that?" She leaned forward. "Because Vance came to me." The air tightened. "He wants me to join a new PR campaign," she continued. "A glossy charity project to clean up the same district they plan to demolish. He said if I do it, it'll look like redemption for me and legitimacy for them." Marcus understood instantly. "They'll use your name to mask the destruction," she nodded. "And they'll use your silence to finish the job." He studied her face, searching for motive. "Why tell me?" "Because I owe you more than an apology," she said quietly. "And maybe because I'm tired of being someone else's weapon." Marcus exhaled slowly. "So what's your plan?" "I won't do their campaign," she said. "But if I refuse, they'll bury me again. You know how this industry works. They'll leak, manipulate, twist the story until I'm the villain twice over." He tapped the table once, thinking. "Then we do the opposite. We take the story back." She frowned. "What do you mean? You go public," he said. "Tell the truth about Halbert, about the deal, about how greed hides behind good intentions. If you're brave enough to stand next to me again, we'll expose them together." Vivian froze. "Stand next to you? After everything that happened?" Marcus's voice softened. "Maybe redemption isn't about erasing the past. Maybe it's about rewriting it together." She looked at him, eyes bright with fear and something like hope. "You'd risk your name to save mine?" He smiled faintly. "I'm not saving you. I'm saving the city that made me." For a moment, The silence between them felt electric, like the pause before a storm. "Then let's do it," she whispered. Marcus nodded once. "Tomorrow morning?" No PR teams, no filters. Just truth. She hesitated. "You realize what you're asking for. This will be war." He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Good. Wars build empires if you fight them right." As he left, Vivian sat there alone, staring at the empty glass in front of her. The last time she'd been at that table, she'd broken a man's dignity. Now she'd found the courage to rebuild her own. Outside, rain began to fall soft at first, then heavy, washing the city clean for what was coming. Because morning would bring headlines louder than any scandal, and for once, both their names would stand on the same side of the truth. And if you think this alliance is redemption, stay with Mess, because when power joins hands with guilt, the world never looks away for long. By dawn, the city was still wet from night rain, the streets shining like mirrors that didn't want to forget what they'd seen. Marcus Reed stood on the rooftop terrace of his office building, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the clouds peel away from the skyline. In a few hours, every news feed would show his face beside Vivian Crane's, two names the world thought would never stand side by side. He had spent the night reading old letters from his mother, the ones she wrote on napkins when money was tight and hope was thinner. "Build something worth your name," she'd told him once. "But remember, your name isn't the building. It's the people who walk inside it." That line stayed with him as he checked the time. 7:42 a.m. The interview would go live at 9. Down the street, Vivian sat in a makeup chair at a small independent studio, no glam team, no luxury trailer, just harsh fluorescent lights and a trembling resolve. She'd chosen to appear exactly as she was, natural, unfiltered, stripped of her old armor. The host had promised one thing: authenticity. "You ready?" the producer asked softly. Vivian nodded. "Not really," she admitted, "but that's why it matters." At 9 o'clock sharp, the feed went live. 2 screens. Marcus in his office, Vivian in the studio. No introduction music, no sponsors. Just 2 voices meeting in public truth. Vivian began. "A week ago, I was the villain in a story that taught me who I really am. And the man sitting on the other screen, he taught me that lesson without raising his voice." Her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't shake. "Today, we're here to talk about something bigger than a viral moment. We're here to talk about the cost of forgetting humanity in the pursuit of profit." Marcus leaned forward. "There's a project underway that will destroy communities under the name of redevelopment. The same company that once rejected me for being who I am now wants to use people like Vivian to clean up their image. We're not here for revenge. We're here to stop that lie." The comments exploded in real time. This is what accountability looks like. She's really doing it. Marcus Reed is different. Vivian continued, explaining Halberd Holdings' proposal, the hidden evictions, the false charity fronts. Her voice broke once when she mentioned the families who'd lose their homes, but Marcus stepped in quietly. "I grew up there," he said. "My mother's diner was the first casualty of progress. They called it development then, too." For 30 unbroken minutes, truth replaced spectacle. And for the first time, both of them felt the weight of control shift not toward them, but toward the people who finally had a story that belonged to them. When the feed ended, Marcus exhaled slowly. His phone vibrated hundreds of messages, reporters, supporters, critics. But one stood out. "You just made powerful enemies." "Elena," he typed back. "Then we're doing something right." At the same moment, Vivian walked out of the studio into a wall of flashing cameras, not hostile this time, but curious. "Vivian, is this redemption?" one shouted. She paused, the wind tugging at her coat. "No," she said softly. "This is responsibility." Inside an office on the 43rd floor of Halberd Holdings, Charles Vance watched the broadcast with a snarl. They want a war? He muttered. Fine, we'll give them one. He grabbed his phone, dialing. Leak whatever dirt you can find on both of them. I don't care if its true truth is negotiable. As the city hummed below, storm clouds began to form again, not from the sky, but from power itself preparing to defend its throne. By nightfall, the glow had turned cold. The broadcast that had felt like liberation in the morning now echoed through every news cycle as analysts, pundits, and strangers tore it apart for sport. Hashtags twisted, support splintered, and within hours Marcus's stock had dropped another 3%. Every network framed the story differently. Hero CEO turns activist. Fallen actress seeks publicity. Corporate feud threatens economy. The truth had become a currency none of them could control. Marcus sat alone in his office. The lights off. The skyline a jagged silhouette against the glass. His phone buzzed again. Elena, his chief of staff. They're calling an emergency board meeting, she said. They think your personal crusade is putting Reed Capital at risk. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Tell them I'll face them in the morning. You shouldn't go in alone, she warned. I've never gone in alone, he replied quietly. I walk in with every person they don't see. Across town, Vivian watched the same headline scroll across a television in her small apartment. For the first time in years, she had no assistant, no entourage, no filtered lens. Just silence and the knowledge that the world was deciding what kind of woman she was, again. Her agent had called earlier, voice tight with fear. Vivian, they're saying you fabricated the whole thing to save your career. She had laughed bitterly. If I wanted to save my career, I'd have stayed quiet. Then came the doorbell. When she opened it, Marcus was standing there, rain on his shoulders, exhaustion in his eyes. You shouldn't be here, she said. Neither should you, he answered. They shared a weary smile before she stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was sparse, the air thick with the scent of black coffee and uncertainty. They're turning the story, Marcus said. Vance is leaking half-truths, trying to paint us as partners in a conspiracy. Vivian poured 2 cups, hands trembling. So what do we do? He took the cup, didn't drink. We stay still. Truth always outruns noise. She sat opposite him, searching his face for cracks. Do you ever get tired of being calm? He chuckled softly. Every day. But anger's expensive. It costs clarity. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of city rain. Vivian looked down at her hands. You know, she said, when I first met you, I thought silence meant weakness. Now I think it's the loudest thing in the room. He met her gaze. And I used to think apology meant surrender. Turns out it's strength. The words hung there, simple but heavy, as if something in the air shifted, an understanding deeper than forgiveness, quieter than attraction, yet pulsing with both. Then his phone vibrated again. Elena. He almost ignored it, but her message flashed urgent. Vance isn't stopping at rumors. He's pulling records. What records? Vivian asked. He turned the screen toward her. A headline from a gossip site already forming. Marcus Reed's secret past. The truth about his fortune. Vivian's heart sank. What's he digging for? Marcus stared out the window. The one thing I never wanted public. The way I made my first million. Outside, thunder cracked across the city, and for the first time, Marcus Reed looked almost afraid. He set the untouched coffee down and whispered, It's not what they think, but once the world tastes blood, it doesn't stop chewing. Vivian reached across the table, touching his hand gently. Then we tell the story before they twist it. He looked at her, the faintest smile returning. Together? Together, she said. Outside, lightning flashed brief, blinding, like the moment before revelation. And somewhere in the city, Charles Vance smiled at the screen, already drafting tomorrow's headline, certain that empires built on truth crumble faster than lies. But he hadn't met Marcus Reed at his full strength yet. Stay with me, because when the past knocks on power's door, even truth starts to bleed. The storm broke before sunrise. Rain hammered the glass walls of Reed Capital, while Marcus stood inside the empty boardroom, sleeves rolled up, watching lightning strobe across the skyline. On the table lay a single manila envelope that Elena had slid to him an hour earlier. Inside were copies of the files Halbert Holdings had leaked, old contracts, bank records, a photograph of a young Marcus shaking hands with a man everyone in finance knew by one name only, Santo Cole. The image looked harmless until you knew who Santo was, the quiet architect of half the city's black market money in the 2000s. Marcus had worked for him once, long before Reed Capital existed, back when he was a broke kid who knew numbers better than sleep. Santo's company had given him his first real paycheck and, later, the leverage to buy it out legally. He'd built his empire on clean deals after that, but the origin story was messy, gray, survivable only through silence. And now, silence had turned into a loaded weapon pointed back at him. He spread the documents across the table, every page smelling faintly of ink and accusation. Elena watched from the doorway. They're saying you laundered money for him. I didn't, Marcus said. I know. But they don't care about the truth. They care about the story. He closed the envelope. Then we give them a better one. Across the city, Vivian scrolled through the same leak on her phone, heart pounding. The news sites were calling it Reed's 30 Millions, complete with grainy photos and anonymous quotes from insiders. She threw the phone onto the couch and pressed, her palms against her face. She'd promised Marcus they'd face this together, but she hadn't expected the world to smell blood this quickly. The old version of her, the one who thrived on spotlight, would have called a press conference, performed contrition, spun a narrative. But the woman she was becoming knew the performance couldn't fix what truth had already broken. She grabbed her coat and headed into the rain. When she reached Reed Capital, security hesitated only a moment before letting her in. Marcus was still by the window, tie loosened, eyes distant. I told you we'd fight this together, she said. He turned. You shouldn't be here. They'll say you're part of it. They already are, she replied. So we might as well write the ending ourselves? He almost smiled. You ever get tired of bravery? She shook her head. Only when it's quiet. They stood there, rain flickering on the windows like static. Two figures framed by a city that loved to build gods just to watch them fall. Marcus finally spoke. I used to think money cleaned everything. Turns out it just hides the dirt better. Vivian stepped closer. Then maybe it's time to stop hiding. Outside, reporters were already gathering, umbrellas like black blossoms in the storm. The next move would decide everything. His company, her fragile redemption, the city's faith in them both. He looked at the envelope again, then at her. If we tell the truth, he said slowly, I lose everything I built. She met his gaze. And if you don't, you lose yourself. The thunder outside answered for him. By noon the rain had thinned to mist, but the swarm of reporters outside, Reed Capital, thickened until their umbrellas touched like a single dark shell around the building. Marcus adjusted his tie in the lobby mirror. The reflection that stared back looked calm, but he could feel the pulse in his throat hammering like a clock that wanted to run. Vivian stood beside him, damp hair curling against her cheeks, the trace of fear in her eyes balanced by something steadier faith. Once you start, she said quietly, don't stop. Don't defend, just tell it. He nodded. Truth doesn't need armor. When they stepped outside, the roar hit first, the flash storm of cameras, the flood of questions thrown like stones. Mr. Reed, did you launder money? Ms. Crane, are you covering for him? Is this partnership real or performance? He walked past them until he reached the temporary podium Elena had set up beneath the awning. Water dripped from the edge, tapping the microphone in a slow rhythm. He waited until the noise fell away, until the city itself seemed to hold its breath. "My name is Marcus Reed," he began, voice low but unshaking. "Before I built Reed Capital, before I could afford this suit or this skyline, I worked for a man named Santo Cole. He was powerful. He was dangerous. I didn't know the full extent of his business then, but I knew he gave me a chance when no one else would. I took it. I learned. And when I realized what he was, I walked away. I bought him out legally. I turned his company into something that built instead of bled. The records they've shown you are real, but they're incomplete. They tell you where I started, not where I finished." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus continued, eyes steady. "If that makes me guilty of surviving, then I'll take the sentence. But don't confuse beginnings with endings. People like me aren't born into clean slates. We earn them." Vivian stepped forward beside him, her voice carried even through the drizzle. "And people like me spend too long pretending we're better than the hands that served us. I stood here once laughing at a man I didn't see. Today I'm standing with him because seeing is the only redemption I've got left." The cameras caught the moment, the contrast of her pale coat against his dark suit, rain blurring the space between them until they looked carved from the same light. Marcus finished simply, "I'm not asking for belief. I'm asking for perspective. What you call a scandal is the story of every person who's ever had to make a dirty dollar clean. That's my truth." He stepped back, letting the silence answer. For a heartbeat, the crowd didn't move. Then someone started clapping soft, hesitant, spreading. Others joined, not as fans, but as witnesses. Inside the building, board members watched through glass, their faces unreadable. Elena turned to one of them and said, "That's what leadership looks like." By evening, the clip was everywhere. Some commentators called it confession, others called it manipulation. But among the noise there was a quiet current, admiration. People from neighborhoods like his filled comment sections with messages that read, "Finally, someone said it." Marcus and Vivian rode the elevator back to the top floor in silence. When the doors opened, he exhaled for the first time in hours. She looked at him, half smiling. "You just rewrote the ending." He shook his head. "No, just started the next chapter." Outside, the clouds broke and sunlight spilled across the wet streets like a promise trying to keep itself. "Stay with me, because the price of truth isn't paid once. It collects interest. And what Marcus is about to lose next will cost more than money." The sunlight that followed his confession didn't last. By the next morning, the boardroom at Reed Capital felt colder than it ever had. Every director sat stiff behind polished glass, their faces trained into masks of professionalism that didn't hide the panic underneath. Stock had fallen another 4% overnight. Clients were calling hourly. Marcus took his seat at the head of the table, jacket off, eyes steady. "You've read the reports," he said. "Now hear the truth directly." An older director cleared his throat. "Marcus, perception is reality in this business. You may have satisfied the public with your speech, but investors don't trade on morality. They trade on trust, and trust has a price." Marcus folded his hands. "Then buy it back with transparency." "That's not enough," another snapped. "The optics are catastrophic. We need distance." It wasn't a vote yet, but he could feel it coming, the quiet betrayal hidden behind polite language. Elena sat 2 chairs down, jaw tight. She knew the signals too, papers already prepared, the whispers before the storm. A third director leaned forward. "The board is prepared to request that you step aside temporarily purely as a gesture of accountability. Interim leadership while we stabilize the market." Marcus almost laughed. "Step aside from what I built? Only until confidence returns." He rose slowly. Confidence isn't lost when a man tells the truth. It's lost when people who benefited from his silence abandon him the moment he speaks. The room went still. After the meeting, Elena followed him into the hall. "They're gonna make it official," she said. "They'll call it a sabbatical." "I expected it," he said quietly. "Truth doesn't come without eviction." She touched his arm. "You still have the staff, the loyalty. We can fight this." He shook his head. "Not yet. Let them take the crown. I'll rebuild the kingdom." Outside the glass tower, protesters had gathered, not against him, but against the corporations that hid behind false philanthropy. His speech had lit a fuse he hadn't planned for. People were marching in the streets of his old neighborhood, holding signs that read "Truth costs will pay." It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like weight. That evening, he drove through those same streets alone, rolling the window down to breathe the air of what he'd defended. The diner where his mother once worked was still a ruin, but now someone had painted a mural on its wall, his face, and beneath it, the words, "We build anyway." He stopped the car, stepped into the drizzle, and stared until the colors blurred. Back at his apartment, he found Vivian waiting in the lobby, hood pulled low. "You look like you've been through a war," she said. "I lost a battle," he answered. "War's still young." They rode the elevator up in silence. In his penthouse, the lights of the city shimmered through the glass like an audience that never blinked. She poured him a drink without asking, then sat opposite. "They can't erase what you said," she told him. "You gave people permission to be human again." He studied her. "You realize you're part of this now. They'll come for you too." She smiled sadly. "They already have. But I stopped running from my reflection the night you walked out of that restaurant." He looked down at the glass in his hand. Funny how humiliation makes us honest. A vibration interrupted, the phone on the table lighting up with Elena's name. He answered. "Marcus." Her voice came low, urgent. Someone leaked internal files from Reed Capital. Not financials, emails, private notes, strategy decks. "They're claiming you planned the restaurant moment with Vivian for publicity." His breath stilled. "That's a lie. I know. But they have doctored screenshots." The leak's anonymous, routed through 3 servers. Vivian's face drained of color. "They're going to say we staged everything." Marcus turned to her, eyes burning with something between fury and heartbreak. "Ben, whoever did this knows me too well." The line clicked dead. He set the phone down slowly. "There's only one person who had access to those files," he said, voice barely a whisper. "Who?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, the city's reflection ghosting his face. "Elena." Vivienne shook her head. "She's loyal." "She was," he said, until loyalty became liability. Outside, thunder rolled again over the skyline. The war had just drawn blood. He found Elena still in her office long after midnight, the glow of a desk lamp cutting a thin circle of light across stacks of folders. Outside the windows, the city pulsed in distant flashes, ambulance lights, rain streaks, lightning. Marcus closed the door behind him without a sound. "You leaked it," he said. Not a question. She didn't look up. "You shouldn't be here. I built this place," he said quietly. "Where else would I go?" She finally raised her eyes, tired, rimmed red. "It wasn't supposed to explode like this. I only wanted to stop the board from throwing you out. The leak was bait-proof that Halberd was still inside our walls. But someone took it and twisted it before I could pull it back." He stared at her, disbelief flickering into anger. "You played with fire and forgot I was standing in the room. I thought I was protecting you." "No," he said. "You were protecting the company. That's different." She rose from her chair. "You think I don't know the difference? I was here when you had nothing, Marcus. I've cleaned up every mess you made because I believed in what you were building. But lately, you are not building, you're preaching." and the board will burn this place down before they follow a profit. He let the silence stretch, the hurt visible only in the tightening of his jaw. So you decided to save the temple by betraying the priest? Alana's voice cracked. By trying to save the man. For a moment, neither moved. Rain thudded against the glass, thunder rumbling somewhere far off. Marcus stepped closer. You could have come to me. You wouldn't have listened, she said. You've been listening to her instead. Vivian. The name hung between them like static. Marcus exhaled slowly. This isn't about her, isn't it? Elena asked. Since she walked into your life, you've turned every boardroom into a pulpit. You used to believe in numbers. Now you believe in symbolism. He wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't form. Somewhere beneath the anger, there was a kernel of truth. He had changed. He'd started measuring impact in people, not profits. Maybe that frightened them more than failure. Elena sank back into her chair, voice breaking to a whisper. They're preparing the official vote tomorrow. You'll be out before sunrise. I thought if I could control the narrative, they'd hesitate. I misjudged them. Marcus rubbed a hand over his face. So now the company's bleeding, you're bleeding, and the only one smiling is Vance. She nodded once. He offered me a seat on his board. The air left his lungs. And you considered it. Her silence was answer enough. Marcus turned toward the door. You know, loyalty isn't about staying when it's easy. It's about staying when it costs you something. Elena's eyes shimmered. And what has loyalty ever given me but your silence? He stopped, back still to her. It gave you purpose. You just forgot to name it. He walked out before she could answer, the echo of his footsteps slicing through the empty corridor. Downstairs, the lobby was deserted except for Vivian waiting near the elevator, coat over her arm. You found her, she said softly. He nodded and lost her. What now? Now, he said, stepping into the elevator, we finish what we started. The company can have my name. It can't have my conscience. As the door slid shut, she reached out and caught his hand. Then don't face it alone this time. He looked at her, tired but resolute. I won't. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the street shining like glass. Somewhere high above the city, the first light of dawn began to edge across the clouds. Fragile but certain proof that even after ruin, morning still comes. And in that fragile light, Marcus Reed decided that tomorrow he wouldn't fight for ownership, he'd fight for legacy. Because sometimes the price of truth isn't losing everything, it's learning what's worth keeping. The next sunrise looked sharper than usual, as if the sky itself had been polished for judgment. Marcus arrived at Reed Capital an hour before the board convened, moving through corridors that once hummed with admiration and now whispered with uncertainty. Vivian walked beside him, sunglasses hiding the lack of sleep. They'll come armed with lawyers and smiles, she murmured. Then I'll bring truth and silence, he said. In the boardroom, the directors were already seated, faces lit by the blue glow of tablets streaming financial headlines. Reed Capital, CEO. Faces vote to step down. At the far end sat Charles Vance. He had no right to be there. Yet the security guard had let him in the quiet privilege of money. Thought I'd witness history, Vance said, cigar unlit between his fingers. Always enjoy watching empires fall. Marcus took the seat opposite him. Careful, he replied. The ground you're standing on used to be mine. The chair of the board cleared her throat. Mr. Reed, this meeting concerns allegations of misconduct and the company's stability. We'd prefer this to remain civil. Civil? Marcus said. You invited the man trying to bury us. Vance smirked. I'm here because truth interests me. And profit. The chair glanced between them. Let's begin. Elena entered late, face pale, carrying a folder. She avoided Marcus's eyes. Before we proceed, she said, I need to submit new evidence. She laid the folder on the table and stepped back. Vance leaned forward first, hungry. But Marcus reached out, opened the folder, and froze. Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, between Vance and a Reed Capital IT contractor. Messages arranging the fabrication of the restaurant hoax leak, proof of conspiracy. The room erupted in whispers. Elena spoke into the noise, voice trembling. I traced the metadata last night. Vance paid a technician to forge internal documents. I didn't know until it was too late. Vance laughed, a short, dry sound. Convenient confession. Those could be fake too. They're not, Elena said, producing a thumb drive. The originals are here, verified. Every transaction, every transfer. For the first time, Marcus saw Vance's composure slip, the twitch of a jaw, the flare of a nostril. The chair of the board turned to Vance. Is this true? Vance spread his hands. This is theater. The man's bleeding out, and you're believing a story told by his traitor. Marcus rose. You call it theater. I call it accounting. The only difference between us, Vance, is that I balance the books with truth. Vivian stepped forward from the back of the room, removing her glasses. Cameras had gathered outside the door. The hum of media was already leaking through the walls. If you want to see theater, she said, let's open the curtain. She pulled out her phone and began live streaming. The public deserves to see what power looks like when it's afraid. Vance lunged to grab the phone, but Marcus blocked him with one arm, voice calm. Careful, Charles. The last time someone reached for something that wasn't theirs, they lost more than a contract. Security moved in, and the board chair finally slammed her gavel against the table. Enough, Mr. Vance. You will leave this building immediately. Mr. Reed, we'll reconvene to discuss reinstatement once legal confirms this evidence. Vance glared at Marcus as guards led him toward the door. You think this ends me? He hissed. I built men stronger than you and buried them quietly. Marcus leaned close enough for only Vance to hear. Then, this time dig deeper, because I'm not dying quietly. When the doors closed, the room exhaled all at once. Vivian turned the camera off and looked at him. That was your reckoning. He shook his head. No, that was survival. Reckoning's what comes after. Outside, thunder rolled again, not from weather, but from applause. Employees crowded the lobby, watching the live feed replay on giant screens. The empire hadn't fallen. It had cracked open and bled truth. When Marcus and Vivian stepped out of the boardroom, the building felt different, lighter, as if the marble itself had exhaled. Through the glass walls of the lobby, the crowd outside looked like a tide waiting to break. Reporters pressed against the barricades, microphones raised, the din swelling as soon as the doors opened. Marcus walked slowly, no notes in his hands, no prepared speech. The air smelled of wet asphalt and anticipation. A guard tried to guide him toward a waiting car, but he shook his head. No cars today. He pushed through the revolving doors and stood on the steps. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. The city's skyline gleamed behind him like a verdict. Mr. Reed, someone shouted. Is it true Vance fabricated the leaks? It's true, Marcus said. His voice carried easily over the murmur. And it's also true that I built this company from nothing. I made mistakes. I learned, I survived. But survival without integrity is just another kind of failure. The crowd quieted. Cameras blinked like restless fireflies. Vivian joined him on the steps. You all know me, she said, her tone stripped of performance. You know the worst version of me. Maybe that's why I'm here to remind you that people can change when truth demands it. Today isn't about scandal. It's about proof that grace still exists in business and fame in us. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then rising into a roar that echoed between the glass towers. Marcus turned toward her. The the corners of his mouth lifting just enough to show relief. "You didn't have to speak," he murmured. She smiled. "Neither did you." But silence built too many cages already. As they made their way down the steps, reporters closed in. One voice cut through. "What happens now, Mr. Reed? Will you return as CEO?" Marcus paused. "The board will decide that. But whatever they decide, I'll keep building. Not because of titles, but because truth deserves structure." He turned slightly, addressing the cameras directly. "And for anyone watching who's ever been told they don't belong in the room, don't wait for permission. Build your own door." The quote would travel everywhere within hours, stitched into graphics, carved into captions. It would become a rallying cry far beyond Wall Street. Back inside the building, Elena watched from a distance, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The board chair approached her. "You knew is the right thing," Elena nodded. "But it still hurts to be wrong before you're right." The chair smiled faintly. "Then you understand leadership." When Marcus returned inside, employees lined the hallways. No one spoke. Instead, they applauded as he passed a slow, rhythmic sound that filled the corridor like thunder made of gratitude. He reached the elevator, looked at Vivian, and said softly, "It's strange. Winning feels quiet." "That's because peace doesn't make noise," she replied. The doors closed on the sound of applause. Later that night, they stood together on the rooftop of Aurum, the restaurant where it all began. The tables were empty, candles flickering in the wind. From this height, the city glowed alive, imperfect, forgiven. Vivian looked out across the skyline. "Do you ever wish you could erase the night I laughed at you?" Marcus thought for a long moment. "No," he said. "If you hadn't, I'd still be waiting for someone else to validate me. Now I know I never needed it." She nodded, eyes shining. "And if you hadn't bought this place, I'd still be hiding behind a smile." He raised his glass. "To ugly beginnings." She clinked hers gently against his. "And better endings." Below them, traffic hummed like applause fading into distance. Somewhere, the city's pulse slowed to something almost tender. "And if you think this is where the story ends, stay with me, because every reckoning leaves a choice. Rebuild the world as it was, or design the one it should be." The next morning, the city woke to a quieter kind of headline. No exclamation marks, no scandal fonts, just Marcus Reed announces Foundation for Urban Renewal. The article led with a single photograph. Him and Vivian standing on the rooftop of Aurum, glasses raised, dawn spilling behind them like forgiveness made visible. Inside the restaurant, staff moved in easy rhythm. The building smelled of coffee and possibility. Marcus stood at the bar, sleeves rolled, sketching plans on a napkin the way his mother once planned menus. The design wasn't for profit. It was for people. The Reed Initiative, he'd written at the top, a fund for rebuilding neighborhoods without removing the hearts that live there. Vivian arrived carrying a folder of proposals. "Every reporter in town wants a quote," she said. "I told them the story's not finished yet." He smiled. "Good. It shouldn't be." They walked through the dining room, past the table that had changed both their lives. The sunlight fell perfectly across it, as if the universe had decided to forgive the scene. "You really think the board will let you walk away?" she asked. "I'm not walking away," he said. "I'm stepping aside. Reed Capital can run without me. The city can't." She studied him. "You always talk like you're building monuments." "I'm not," he said. "I'm planting trees." Outside, volunteers were already gathering: architects, teachers, chefs, small business owners, people who'd written to him in the weeks after his confession, saying his honesty made them believe in building again. He planned to turn Aurum into the Foundation's headquarters. It felt poetic, the place where pride once ruled now becoming a home for purpose. As they stepped outside, reporters waited, but there was no hostility anymore, only curiosity. Marcus faced them calmly. "This city taught me two lessons," he said. "Never confuse wealth with worth, and never mistake silence for peace. We're rebuilding, not to erase the past, but to prove we can do better than it." Cameras clicked. Pens scratched. Vivian watched him speak and realized she was seeing something she hadn't in years: authentic leadership without performance. Afterward, they walked through the old district slated for demolition. Empty storefronts leaned like tired elders, graffiti blooming over cracked bricks. Children played soccer in the street with a dented can, their laughter echoing through broken windows. Marcus stopped, watching them. "That's what we're fighting for," he said. Vivian smiled. "Then let's give them a field that isn't concrete." He looked at her. "You in?" She nodded. "I owe the city the same truth I owed you." They spent the rest of the day visiting business owners, signing leases, promising funding. Each handshake carried the weight of redemption made tangible. Somewhere between meetings and blueprints, Marcus realized he wasn't chasing atonement anymore. He was living it. By dusk, they returned to Orem exhausted but electric. The restaurant lights glowed soft gold against the evening. Vivian poured them both a drink. "Feels like we're writing the sequel," she said. Marcus chuckled. "Maybe just the footnotes." She studied him quietly. "You ever think about what comes after all this? When the cameras finally stop watching?" He looked at her, then out at the skyline. "Maybe that's when life starts telling the truth." The launch day came beneath a pale gold sky. A stage had been built in front of the old diner lot where Marcus's mother once served coffee to strangers. Now the crowd stretched down to block neighbors. Former employees, city officials, even rival CEOs who had come to witness what redemption looked like when it wore work boots instead of suits. Marcus stood behind the microphone, sleeves rolled, his tie forgotten. Vivian waited a few feet away, notes in her hand she no longer needed. He spoke simply. "When my mother lost this place, she told me not to hate the system. She told me to outgrow it. This foundation isn't revenge. It's a blueprint for doing better." He gestured to the sketches behind him. New affordable housing rising around preserved storefronts, community kitchens, a scholarship named for his mother. "We'll start here," he said, "and we'll keep going until dignity stops being a luxury." Vivian stepped up next. "I came from a world that celebrates perfection," she said. "But perfection has no empathy. What we're building here is messy, loud, human, and that's what makes it real." Applause rolled through the crowd like thunder softened by joy. Cameras caught her turning to him, smiling. His hand brushed hers as he thanked her. It wasn't romance yet, but it was the kind of connection that grows from surviving the same fire. After the ceremony, as the sun dropped low, they walked through the lot alone. The construction crew had already started clearing debris. Marcus stopped beside a cracked piece of the old diner floor, still showing a faded word from its tile mosaic. "Home." He crouched down, touched the word with his fingertips. "She used to scrub this every night," he said. "Said customers deserve clean ground, even if they didn't notice." Vivian knelt beside him. "Then maybe we leave it right here, build around it. Let everyone see what started it." He looked at her and nodded slowly. "That's legacy. Not forgetting, just framing it right." The first lights of the city flickered on around them. Somewhere, music drifted from a nearby window, and the smell of street food mixed with dust and hope. Vivian turned to him. "You realize you've changed the story for both of us?" Marcus smiled. "No, the story changed itself when we stopped trying to control it." She laughed softly. "You make survival sound poetic." "It is," he said. "Every sunrise is a sequel." They stood there for a while, watching workers hang the first banner for the Reed Initiative. The letters caught the wind and fluttered like wings. And in that moment, the man once humiliated for serving, and the woman once defined by mockery, stood side by side as proof that sometimes grace isn't quiet, It rebuilds entire cities. Stay with me, because even legacies have aftershocks, and the final chapter will show how far truth can travel when it stops being whispered. 6 months later, the skyline looked different. Where rubble had once sat, cranes and scaffolds now reached upward, glinting in the morning sun like the ribs of something reborn. The Reed Initiative had become more than a project. It was a pulse running through the city. Neighborhoods that used to dim their lights early now stayed alive deep into the night cafes reopening, kids playing under new street lamps, laughter echoing where silence once ruled. Marcus stood on the balcony of the Foundation's new headquarters, a converted warehouse painted the color of dusk. Below him, volunteers were gathering for the day's work. Vivian came up behind him, coffee in hand. "You realize you've turned this city into a classroom," she said. "Everyone's learning from you." He smiled faintly. "Bet I hope they learn from the failures too." She leaned against the railing. "You still think about the company?" "Sometimes. Reed Capital runs fine without me. They even doubled their community investments. Maybe truth really is contagious." Vivian watched the workers unload supplies. "And what about you?" "You've rebuilt everything but yourself." Marcus chuckled. "That's an ongoing renovation." They fell quiet, watching the city breathe. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived with an envelope marked personal. Inside was a letter on expensive paper, the signature written in bold strokes, Charles Vance. "I lost the board, the contracts, the reputation," it read, "but not the lesson. You were right about building instead of bleeding. Enjoy your kingdom, Reed." Marcus read it twice, then folded it carefully. "Strange," he murmured. "Even the wolves can learn." Vivian tilted her head. "What will you do with it?" "Frame it," he said. "Proof that some victories don't need trophies." That night, they hosted a dinner for the first graduates of the Initiative Scholarship Program. The restaurant buzzed with warmth. Candles flickered, glasses clinked, stories filled the air. Marcus listened more than he spoke, his eyes shining each time a student mentioned their new business or art studio. Vivian watched him quietly, realizing the man who once lived for control now lived for connection. When the dinner ended and the guests drifted out into the night, she joined him at the door. "So," she said, "what does the man who rebuilt a city do next?" He smiled. "Disappear for a while. Let the work speak." She hesitated. "And if it speaks too quietly?" He looked at her. "Then you'll remind it to keep singing." For a long moment they stood there, the hum of traffic below, the stars blurred by the city glow. Something unspoken passed between them, respect, forgiveness, maybe love in its truest, simplest form. She reached out, touching his sleeve. "You ever think about that night?" "All the time," he said. "But not for the reason you think." "I remember it because it proved that one cool moment doesn't define us. It just introduces us to who we could become." Vivian nodded, eyes glistening. "Then here's to introductions." He lifted his glass. "And to every person watching who's ever been underestimated." They clinked softly, the sound lost in the laughter around them. Weeks passed, and the noise around the Foundation slowly settled into rhythm. One night Marcus returned to the rooftop of Orem alone. The city hummed below, a low, steady heartbeat. The skyline was the same, yet everything about it felt different, sharper, cleaner, alive. He thought of the boy who once washed dishes here, the man who once hid behind service, the name that had become both burden and banner. He pulled a notebook from his pocket and began to write, not numbers, not strategy, but words. Legacy isn't what they remember you for. It's what they continue without you. He tore the page out, set it under a wine glass on the same table where the story had begun. Downstairs, Vivian waited. She'd just come from the theater district, where she quietly funded a program for young actors who couldn't afford training. "You're late," she said, smiling. "I was saying goodbye to the past," he answered. She glanced at the notebook page. And did it answer back? It said, "Thank you," he said softly. They walked out into the night together. The streets were alive, music from open windows, food trucks humming, laughter spilling from the corners. For the first time, he didn't feel like the architect of it all. He felt like a citizen among citizens. At a crosswalk, a young waiter from Aram recognized him. "Mr. Reed, can I take your picture?" Marcus shook his head gently. "No pictures tonight, son. Just keep serving with pride." The kid grinned. "Yes, sir." Vivian looked at him. "You still sound like the man in the vest." He laughed. "That's who I'll always be." The uniform just changed. They crossed the street together, blending into the crowd. Somewhere behind them, the restaurant lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the word "Aram" reflected in the puddles, a promise that dignity never dies quietly. For Marcus Reed, the story had come full circle. Humiliation to ownership, silence to influence, isolation to legacy. And for Vivian, redemption had found its truest form, not applause, but purpose. As they disappeared into the living rhythm of the city, the narrator might have whispered, "Stay with me," because stories like theirs don't end. They echo every time someone remembers to turn pain into power.